The fact that I'm in Toronto doesn't mean I stop thinking about Alberta. In so many ways, it is a province that shows philosophical and ideological leadership, and that sometimes manifests itself in the actual practical politics of the place. And right now, in the person of Danielle Smith, the premier of the United Conservative Party, I think we have probably what's the closest thing to a libertarian as a provincial premier in this country. You can certainly argue that Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan is a rock-ribbed conservative, although, like many from that province, he's got sort of a social generosity side that even the old NDP still reverberates with there. But I think Danielle Smith is the most libertarian. And sometimes, though, her ideas are, I don't know, I'm not going to say quirky because that's insulting, but they're esoteric, maybe. They're, well, I don't know, to help me sort of grok what's going on, including with Danielle Smith's views on immigration. We're joined now by really one of our Sherpas in Alberta, one of the senior columnists of that province. I'm talking about our old friend Lauren Gunter, who writes for the Edmonton Sun. Lauren, great to see you again.
Good to see you.
I'm not sure exactly what I was doing with that meandering introduction. I was just trying to say that although I was in Ottawa, it felt like a very Alberta thing, considering the Albertan Tamara Lich was on trial.
Yeah.
And I do know Danielle Smith because we were in college together, and she was always interested in ideas. Tell me a little bit about Danielle Smith on immigration, because I've seen different things from her.
I'd love to tell you more about her on immigration, but she seems to have had a major 180 in the last 3 or 4 months. And I'm not sure it is. It might just be a sharpening of her views, an evolution, a growing up, whatever it is. But in March, she wrote to Prime Minister Trudeau and said, "You're not letting us have enough immigrants here in Alberta. We are going to grow this province to 10 million from 4.5 million by 2050. And therefore, we need lots more immigrants to fill our job vacancies and start up new businesses and things." And I am all in favor of immigrants. I think immigration is good for Canada, but it's not good for Canada in the numbers that the Trudeau government has been allowing. It's crazy. By StatsCan's estimate, last year, they let in 2.3 million people.
There's no other country in the world. No other country in the world has done that.
No, the Americans get that many at their southern border, but they are 10 times the size we are.
Yeah.
And they think of this as a problem. Mm-hmm. The Trudeau government, if it hadn't been, if this immigration level hadn't caused all sorts of economic repercussions, they would not be thinking of it as a problem even now. And even now, it's difficult to get an awful lot of their media friends to report on it as a problem. But it's had a negative impact on the housing market. It's had a negative impact on the job market. It's had a negative impact on educational institutions. It's had a negative impact on social services, and it's made it harder to get a doctor, for instance, because there are too many people coming in. You can't buy a house in Canada on a single average wage anymore, because there are 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million new people flooding in every year under the Liberals. And those people have a right to find a place to live too. The only way you could stop that is to turn back the flow that the Liberals have had. And Danielle Smith finally said that yesterday on a Western Standard website podcast, where she said, well, yes, this is unsustainable what they're doing now. But in fact, I have to think in some ways she added to the problem back in March when she wrote to the Prime Minister. She said, we want more control in Alberta over who we're taking, but we want more. Yeah. And I think that you can imagine that the Trudeauites would forget the Alberta control part of that and just go to cabinet meetings and say, well, look, even the Alberta government wants more people. So how can you say we're taking in too many?
I didn't quite phrase it right, but the thing about Danielle Smith, I think she regards herself as a very open-minded person who cares about intellectual things. I think she reads and she studies and she looks at papers. I think she actually loves the world of ideas. In that way, she's completely the opposite of Justin Trudeau, who would never read a briefing note. We learned he literally had to have someone read to him national security briefings like a bedtime story. Like Justin sits over there and someone reads it to him because he will not do the reading himself. That came out during the China interference matter. Danielle Smith, I think, is someone who is the opposite, but you can go too far the opposite. You can go down rabbit holes and obscure and strange thinking. Like there's this concept, there's this group called the Century Project, which wants 100 million people in this country in a matter of decades. They're not going to live in the big Arctic. Like you look at Canada on a map, it looks huge. Most of it's unlivable. No one's moving to Inuvik or Tuktoyaktuk. They're moving to Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and now they're spilling into some smaller cities, but everyone is really in certain metropolises. It's insane. Toronto is off the hook insane. And here's a stat I saw the other day, Lauren. There's about 750,000 temporary foreign workers, and many of them working in McDonald's, Tim Hortons, like low skill, low paid jobs. Those are multi-billion-dollar multinational companies, and so they get to save $1 or $2 an hour. But I have not seen a young Canadian, by that I mean like a teenager, working in a fast food restaurant in years. And I think back to my own youth. That was my first job. I worked because you can't screw it up. You get paid a little bit of dough, but you learn things about showing up on work on time and being tidy. And you learn you can't get your second job till you have your first job.
That's right. I worked at a Dairy Queen when I was in high school, and it was the busiest Dairy Queen in Western Canada that didn't have burgers. We were just ice cream. But the thing I learned, because the lineups would be really long on a Sunday summer evening, the thing I learned was people get cranky standing in line, and you can't get cranky back.
Right.
You have to learn in customer service that you need to be nice, even to the cranky pants out there. Yeah. And so those are very important life lessons that you learn when you have those first jobs. For sure. And so it is a problem that the government's, federal government in particular, has to deal with. One thing that Smith said yesterday in her podcast on the Western Standard was that this is a problem that all governments are now facing, and we're even starting to see it creep into Alberta. And I think what she meant by that was, for instance, last year Calgary had the greatest increase in rents of any city in the country. And so Calgary is becoming less affordable than it was. Edmonton is still one of the most affordable cities in the country. Calgary is still affordable relative to Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, lots of the other places. But it is becoming less so. And because of the flood, you can see over the next 3 to 5 years, lots of people, if the same levels are maintained by Ottawa, lots of people will flood into Calgary, lots of people will flood into Edmonton, and start to do to the housing market and the job market in those cities what they've already done to the housing markets and the job markets in Toronto and Vancouver in particular. And I think Smith sees that now, that she didn't see in March. I think this idea that we could, in 25 years, double the population of the province is nuts. Yeah. It's only doable if it's done organically. If that's what the market wants, if that's what is needed for work in the oil field, in the service industries, fine, because the housing will follow along with it. But if you're talking about forcing this issue as a government, then that's not going to work. It doesn't work when the feds do it. It's not going to work when the province does it. And another of her ideas that stems from this immigration population expansion thing is this idea that we should build billions of dollars of intercity trains and commuter trains all over the province. Like, where does that come from? Like, that's as nutty as the Calgary City Council building a $6.3 billion LRT line to nowhere, because in the future we'll need it. And it's as nutty as the federal government spending money on transit all over the country that isn't designed to do anything in particular, but make them feel more green about themselves and maybe make Greta more pleased with them or something.